Thank you. Thanks, Ian, and thanks to the Science Gallery for putting together the show and having us here. Let's get started, I guess.
They told me many times that I'm Nathalie and Eric is Eric. But I guess the question mark and the exclamation mark would be pretty evident. Eric, of the two of us, is the one that believes that everything can be done, everything is always great, fantastic, optimistic. And I'm the one which is always wondering, are we going to do that? This is not really working. You're not thinking about other important things. But it's working fine at the end, right?
And I guess tonight we're going to talk about those differences a little bit between the two of us, maybe not just our personalities, but also our disciplines. And Nathalie's an architect, and I'm a game designer. And this is really sort of an informal talk about our own work and especially the projects that we've done together, but really what we've learned from each other's disciplines.
Yeah, so just for curiosity, how many are game designer? And I'm not asking about how many are architect. Yeah.
And anyone coming from the architecture world? More?
Yeah.
A little bit.
There's one.
That's how Nathalie always feels at these game events too. She's a lone architect, so. She knows where you're coming from. And then many people didn't raise their hand. I guess they're the mystery people for us. Hopefully we have something for everyone.
So I'm an architect. I often work with art and architecture. I guess my first job was with a group of Finnish architects called Casa Grande Rintala that did very stunning installation that were physical building, and they often had a strong participatory element with the public. This was in Yokohama Triennale of Art. There was this cocoon. Every night, every day a bird was lifted with a meteorological balloon, going up in the sky, bursting, landing, and there were seeds in the belly of the bird, asking to plant the seed. But just to say, it wasn't totally new to work with other in a cross between different fields than I've done with Eric. And what I do now also is doing a lot of project management for artists. This is in Brazil for the Japanese artist Mariko Mori. I was actually in London at the Royal Academy until this morning for a show that they have there, offer work. And again, not always, but this specific work, the person enters in the body of the sculpture, and their brainwave are being recorded and somehow digitally transformed with graphic and projected in the dome of the UFO. And then more traditional work, which are building or furniture of different type. And that's it. Yeah.
And so we're just giving you a little bit of a background on our work as individuals before we talk about the work that we've done together. I'm a game designer. I've worked in the game industry for almost 20 years. I ran a company called Gamelab in New York City for about half of that time that did a lot of online games. Probably, this is some of our work. Probably Diner Dash was one of the most popular games that we made. We did a lot of small-scale online games. I also work making more unusual experimental games in a lot of different media. So the one on the upper left is Sissy Fight. That's a game about little girls in a schoolyard that came out in 1999, I think. The cards there are from a project called the Metagame. That's a game where you argue and debate about game aesthetics. I have done some work on the educational side. So on the lower left is a screenshot from GameStar Mechanic. That's a whole community website that lets kids create games. So you basically become a game designer and you make these simple browser-based games as part of the experience. And then my most recent commercial project was this strange experimental Xbox Kinect game called Leela. I also do other things around games. These are from a film I did with David Kaplan called Play, that's set in a future time when the lines between reality and games have been blurred. It's a short film. And I also have an academic life. So I've written books with Katie Salen, the Rules of Play and the Game Design Reader, that are standard textbooks for game design. And I teach at the NYU Game Center, where we teach students about games. We have a master's program in game design, and we do a lot of fun events, conferences, tournaments, and exhibitions there too. For me, though, really, it's about making games, and even though I do work as an instructor and maybe tell stories around games, for me, making games is really my passionate activity. Let's start by actually playing a game with you guys. So I think this will still work with this number of people. So the game that we wanted you guys just to start off by playing with, to give us something to talk about, is called MMRPS, which of course stands for Massively Multiplayer Rock Paper Scissors. So it's the same terminology in Ireland, I assume? Rock, paper, scissors, yes? The same set of relationships that rock beats paper and
yes.
Paper, yes, okay, et cetera, et cetera. So actually rock doesn't beat paper, does it? I'm an idiot, I think. I got that backwards, so I was testing you all on the depth of your rock, paper, scissors knowledge. Well, here's how it's gonna work. When we start the game, all of you guys are gonna stand up, and you're going to find someone nearby and do rock, paper, scissors. If you tie, do it again. If you lose, sit down. And if you win,
find another person
and play with them. Then we'll bring the two winners down here for the championship round, best 2 out of 3. Does that sound good?
Are you playing?
No, we'll referee. I don't think it would be unfair. Okay, is everybody ready? So everyone stand up.
Is it 1, 2, 3, and then go? Or is it 1, 2, and go?
I think that's a good clarification. Do you want to make a universal rule for what do you think it should be?
I think 1, 2, 3, and then go.
Okay, so it's 1, 2, 3, go, or shoot, or whatever term you like to use. And all right, you heard it here first. So go ahead and let's get started. All right. 1, 2, 3, then show. All right. 1, 2. Oh no, wait. Oh, all right. So if you tie, go again. If you've won, find someone else nearby. Wow, they're dropping like flies in the audience. The whole left side of the auditorium is almost gone. If you're looking for an opponent, wave your hand. Find someone nearby. All right, here we go. It looks like we're going to have the... All right, so who's... All right, so why don't you two face off? And here we have another. This is our semifinals going on in the audience, quarterfinals, or all right. So in the gray sweatshirt, come on down. Looks like you're and here. All right, so I think your slow play strategy paid off for you in the end. All right, so we're gonna have a championship round. So we're gonna say 1, 2, 3, go, and then it's gonna be the best 2 out of 3. So okay, and what are your names? John and Kevin. Okay, John and Kevin, ready? 1, 2, 3, go. Ah, okay, rock, that's okay. Give them time to pause. Think about it. 1, 2, 3, go. Oh, Kevin. 1 to 0. Ready? 1, 2, 3, go. Oh, John. All right, this is it. This could determine our match. 1 to 1. We're playing at 2 points. Ready? 1, 2, 3, go. Oh, and John came back from behind. Let's give it a round of applause. Thank you, John. Congratulations. Thank you. All right, so. And. Better that happened to me than somebody else, I guess. All right. So, what just happened? Well, one of the ideas that we want to talk about around games is that what do Nathalie and I actually do when we create a game? One way of thinking about what we do is that we create a space of possibility, that we create or enable or provide structures, and that those structures are sort of constraints that limit what people are going to do, but those constraints create the possibility of an experience. So in this case, we gave you some rules to follow that were about rock, paper, scissors, but spaces were created out of that, spaces of possibility. In this case, it is possible that you transformed your relationship to other people. I don't know if John and Kevin had ever met before. Now they actually have a history of a conflict with each other, victorious on one side. And maybe it also changed your relationship to the space of the room, even to the information that were being conveyed here. You weren't passive listeners that suddenly you became active in the center of attention for a little while. So,
but I think something that we find that we have in common in our discipline is that both game design and architecture, by setting some structures or rule which you design, you create a possibility for an experience, but none of them are truly controlling the way you experience either the space or the game, because the gameplay is always different, the way you use a building is always different. So in that sense, it's different from a film or a book that, of course, everybody reads and watch and feels in different way, but it's a very guided, linear experience. And similarly to, again, between game design and architecture compared to a movie or a book, is that a book, the grammar can be, in a poetry, the grammar can be completely broken and still hold up and be wonderful. But both in architecture and game, there's something that, there's a structure that needs to function, and if it doesn't function, it doesn't hold up. It's the engineering architecture, maybe the, what do you call it in game design? The mechanic of the game? Yes. And that, that's something that you really can't break if you still call it architecture or a game. Or
right, and you always say that you were struck when you came into games that you always heard people comparing games to cinema or narrative. To compare it to
cinema, what I was thinking, no, this has nothing to do with cinema. It's so much more similar to architecture. I don't see why it's not clear to everybody. But, and also maybe in the debate that we have heard a lot about whether game are design or other form or the art, it doesn't really matter in architecture. It can be anything. It's not. It has a functionality, as a structure, but it can also just be beautiful and have aesthetic intent.
And for me as a game designer, what's amazing is this idea that we create structures of rules and we don't know how things are going to play out. So we played this game with you in the audience, but we didn't know who was going to come here at the end. We didn't know that the final match would have an interesting, start slow with a tie, and then one player gets ahead, then the other player comes back from behind. That little sort of miniature drama or theatrical moment. We didn't design that. That wasn't part of our design. All we did is provide the structure and a context for you guys to take that on. So it's interesting that game design, in that sense, it's a sort of a second order form of design. We design the structures which then make experiences possible, but we don't stand next to our players and tell them what to do at every moment. What we wanted to do tonight is think a little bit, take some of these ideas about the space of possibility and think about the projects that what we've designed and what we've made and the context in which they all take place. And we wanted to think about it on three levels in terms of the designed elements that we make, the experience of it, and the context in which it takes place. So we're going to start by talking about the designed elements, the actual stuff that we make.
So just as a comparison, the design element, if that was a cake or the ingredient, what you really, the ingredient that you use.
As opposed to the
experience, then it's the taste of the cake. Was it good? Was it bad? Too sweet? I didn't like it, but somebody else liked it. And the context maybe was it a cake for a birthday? Was it a cake to celebrate something? Was it a cake for a sad event?
Right. To poison somebody.
To poison somebody.
Right.
Yes.
Why was it made? Who's eating it and why? So everything that surrounds the actual cake itself. So this is a way of thinking about design. The things you make, the experiences it produces, and then the context in which it's all taking place. So the talk is structured as a series of sort of what we learned from each other's fields in designed elements. So the first one, Nathalie, I think is you.
Yes. So I think by working with Eric, I learned that rules are important. Now, I know that telling it to a crowd of game designer and one architect, I'm not saying anything very brilliant, but I just never, ever realized how really important they were. And this is the first project that we did together. It's called 16 Tons. It was a game that was made for the Art History of Game conference in Atlanta. And very simply, the game could work as a tabletop, but what we really did was to make it in a space. And as you can see, in a way, it looks like a sad kindergarten from the 50s. The colors are really dull. And the game, it's about a very simple grid 4x4 in which 4 players are trying to get the 2 pieces of their color directly adjacent to each other.
Right. So if you can see just to back up, those are actually sections of heavy steel pipe. So those steel pipes are actually you sort of drag them around. And as Nathalie said, it's for 4 players, and the goal is to get your 2 pieces next to each other on the grid, which is actually very simple because they start off pretty close to each other.
The game is complicated by the fact that when it's your turn, you don't play, but somebody else is betting and trying to pay you to do what they want.
So at the beginning of the game, every player takes $3 out of their pocket, or euros, as the case may be, and you use that money on other players' turns to bribe them. So on your turn, you don't get to do what you want. Instead, you say, put me to work. And then other people bid on your behavior. I'm going to pay you $1 or $2 or $3. You have to take the highest bid. That player gives you the money, and then you have to do what they tell you to do. So as you play the game, the money kind of changes hands, and it becomes this very psychological game of not just the strategy of the pieces on the board, but also the social strategy of how the players are interacting with each other, trying to manipulate each other, and negotiate.
And there's been really interesting things that happened. Well, at the first round, the winner realized, okay, I won, but everybody has money and I'm cashless. So they go to check what do you do with the money, and the rule intentionally don't tell it. So they want to play a second round deciding what you do about the money at the end, because it may not be convenient to win, or then you start team up with another person so that you share the money that you own if I end the game at this moment, or somebody that play with credit card not having money, or any sort of variation or having share. But just as a design, for the design itself, it's a 4x4 grid, it's called 16 ton. We wanted, why don't we use $4 bills? And we tried it, and it was never, ever, ever ending. The game was completely broken. We tried maybe for 40 minutes once. There was just too much money, and nobody was ever in a critical position not to be able to do the right move at the next time. So it just did not work. And it's really not... I guess that's my point. Rule matters, right? I wanted, for the sake of compulsive cleanliness, it should be $4. But no, you can't do that.
Right. So the specificity of the rules in games, in a funny way, are mathematics under the hood. And we should also say that we did play with the ambiguity of the rules, too. This idea that we don't tell people what to do with the money at the end. It was wonderful to see people invent their own variations of the game. We just showed this game in San Francisco, and we had, for the first time, one player lending another player money from their hand in the game, and then paying it back to the other person within the same game, so that another person wouldn't be able to win. So there was a really interesting, strange behavior going on. But this idea of rules is that Nathalie's talking about is actually pretty important in games. It's really a fundamental aspect of what makes a game a game. For example, this I believe is not tic-tac-toe. It's noughts and crosses. Is that correct? Okay. So for example, what are the rules of noughts and crosses? What's a rule of noughts and crosses? Anybody?
X's and O's.
It's
called X's and O's.
It's also called X's and O's. Okay. So what's a rule of X's and O's or noughts and crosses or tic-tac-toe or?
Player may place one token on the board at a time.
A player may place one token on the board at a time. What else do we need to know to play this game?
To win the game, you need to get 3 of your pieces in a row.
All right, 3 in a row wins. That's good. What else do we need to know?
The sequence has to be one against.
Right. And there's 2 players that are alternating. Can they place them in any square?
Any square that's not taken by
right.
the player's token or your token.
Right. So we almost have all the rules. There's a 3x3 grid. 2 players alternate turns, placing one token in an empty square, their X or O. 3 in a row wins. And is there any other end state?
There's a tie.
There could be a tie, right? So my point is that these are the rules of tic-tac-toe or noughts and crosses or X's and O's. And what's amazing to think about is the same idea of space of possibility. That these simple rules have described every game of X's and O's that's ever been played. Whether it's been played by people drawing lines in the sand with a stick, whether it is children carving into a table, or just playing with chalk on a chalkboard. These rules have produced millions and millions of hours of behavior. These simple mathematical rules. Now, obviously, X's and O's is not a game that we all would find enjoyable. It's sort of a solved problem if you're not a young child. But it's amazing to me that's the power of games, right? That there's this sort of that there are these underlying mathematical structures, but then what they produce is very much the opposite. Because although games, in a certain point of view, are fashioned out of rules, what happens when you step into a game and you submit your behavior to the restrictions of a game is play. And play is really the opposite of rules. Play is about improvisation and spontaneity and creativity, even while rules are very much about logical, scientific rationality, right? I mean, if you were playing noughts and crosses and someone played a piece sort of off to the side, or they invented a third type of mark to play, you would say, well, what's going on? We have to resolve this. Just like I think you had a great question, all right, we have to resolve what the ambiguity in, is it 1, 2, 3, or is it 1, 2, 3, shoot, right? So when we play games, that we do have to establish these sort of common sets of rules for us to understand. But then once we enter into them, games become the opposite of rules. Because if all they felt like was following some logical system, we wouldn't want to play them. In fact, play is the opposite of rules. And that wonderful sort of contradiction is something that, as a game designer, I find incredibly fascinating to think about and to look about for games. So for me, the flip side of Nathalie saying that rules are important is also that rules rules don't matter, which is really which really by which we really mean to say that that they're necessary but not sufficient, right? That often as game designers we overemphasize the rules because they are the ingredients of the cake, right? They are the thing that we put our hands on in order to make. But ultimately, it's the experience of the game that is more important than the rules in and of themselves. For example, in 16 tons, one of the things I learned was that this is a sort of some of Nathalie's drawings. One of the great things about working with an architect is that they make these beautiful schematics for everything. It's really inspiring. So for structure heads that like game designers. So this wall, this paper wall that's around the space of the game, we had come up with the idea. We wanted to try it out. I always thought, okay, that'll sort of help things out. It'll help make it more visually arresting and give it some presence in the space. But it's not really a part of the game, right? Because if you're a game designer, if you were to list out the rules of 16 tons, you would not say there has to be a wall. Because as Nathalie said, there's a tabletop version of it. You don't necessarily have to have a wall to play the tabletop version.
And the wall took 90% of the budget.
Right, the wall was the most expensive thing. So, but what was fascinating to me as a game designer is that the wall did matter in creating the experience of the game. And not only it sort of created this kind of, well, you have to imagine that this piece was designed for an art gallery space, and that's mostly where it's been shown. But it creates this kind of intense, arguing betting pit. And so the wall helps sort of hide this transgressive behavior that's happening inside the gallery space, and you sort of feel protected and okay taking out money and telling people what to do. When we showed this piece once in Los Angeles, and we were taking it down, and there was a group of players that really wanted to keep playing and finish their game.
Because they were betting.
Yeah, they were playing for, I don't think they were doing a $5 game, which we had some photos of. That's a $60 win for the person. People actually play that. But they were playing for money. And,
it wasn't in the rule either.
That wasn't in the rules, right. So, but the thing is, so they really wanted to finish their game. We said, you know what, we have to start deinstalling. We'll take the wall down. You guys can keep on playing. As soon as the wall came down, and they were sort of all alone in this room, the game just sort of stopped. They were in the middle of their game. The energy sort of, it's hard for me to explain. The energy just kind of dissipated out of their experience. And these were people that were really intensely wanting to play. So the wall wasn't a functional part of the rules, but it was a crucial part of creating the sort of psychological, experiential space of the game.
So of course, holding money in your hand is not what you do on the street usually. Having it close makes you feel like you're in a room. Although people, good players, will start hiding the amount of money that they had so that others wouldn't know how much they could bet.
Right.
But the entrance was really, really tight. It wasn't open. It was not. It was a little bit tight to enter. It will get crowded very quickly,
right.
So it feels that there's a lot of tension, even if the space where it's exhibited is much, much bigger. So all of that worked well in that sense.
And again, so the idea that rules don't matter is just to say that rules are necessary but not sufficient. That there are things that Nathalie's teaching me about the way that space really does create the possibility for play. And this is another project we wanted to share with you.
So similarly, this is called Starry Heaven. It was for a party organized by Killscreen, which is a magazine, I guess,
based in New
York City about video games. And it was at MoMA, the Museum of Modern Art in New York. It was in the garden, on the sculpture garden. And we knew it would be a game that would have a lot of person because it was a party. And we knew that people would come and go and wouldn't have time to learn any rule. And that it had to be visually quite present because what they really wanted in the garden was to have something physically very visible.
You want to show the video?
Yeah.
Part of the video, maybe?
The video, yes.
Okay. Let's cross our fingers and hope this works. Is it playing up there? Yeah, so it should be audio. Yes, it's playing. We'll just show a minute or two of the video to give you a sense of the project from last summer. Those weather balloons are actually pretty large in meters.
6 meter wide. It's just that the perspective makes them look.
Yeah.
The largest one is 6 meters.
They had very, very heavy weights at the bottom to keep them anchored. This explains the rules pretty well. You can touch one person connected. You can't touch two people, and it can't be someone over where Daniel is. You have to touch someone who's connected. All right. This is where Natalie's embarrassed by how self-promoting the video is. That's the personality difference again. So we'll skip that part. So we also want to make a point about the non-rule space design of the game. Now, obviously, there is a sort of a strategy game in Starry Heavens. There's a ruler in the center. They're calling out the black, white, or gray, which is telling the people all around them on this grid how to move. And they're trying to overthrow the ruler. And the ruler, every time they call out a color, is pulling this rope in the middle that's attached to the biggest balloon, which actually starts getting physically difficult.
It had a pull of 50 kilograms, so it was pretty hard.
But what was interesting to us about Starry Heavens was the way that, again, the balloons overhead are not part of the game, but they create a social space of play.
I think you can see from the first picture, it's just in front of the glass facade, and it goes up for 3 stories that are each one almost 2 stories tall. And I guess my fear was to make a chessboard in a park, which is totally fine, but I just did not really want to do that. And also because it was in a party, just to have something on your head that makes it feel like it's a big umbrella where people are gathering, so that when people look around, doesn't just look, you see a lot of back of other people, right. But you are somewhere and you want to be underneath something. And I think it did work.
And in this case, these non-rule elements of the game, the way that we created a physical space, help people enter into the game. So in the case of Starry Heavens, there's no beginning or end to the game. The game just kind of rolls forward. You can step in and start playing at any time. The ruler is calling out colors, and until the ruler gets overthrown, the players are moving around. They're getting knocked out. They're stepping back in again.
The game is self-balancing because there's continuously people that are eliminated by other players, and at the same time, you can re-enter, but only when a certain color is scored. So it's just keeping its own.
The trick to the game, which we didn't really tell you, is that if you're next to someone, if two people are next to a third person, they can both touch that person and banish them. And I need to banish two other people in order to overthrow the ruler. So while all the players have the same goal of getting to the ruler, they can't cooperate. They're forced to sort of backstab each other constantly in order to sort of get to the center where the ruler is. So, and I should say that when we actually showed this project again in Berlin this summer, and we had a live band. It was a sort of the brilliance of the Play Public Festival suggested that we have live musicians. So we had a band improvising as the players were playing, a microphone for the ruler, and it became a kind of performance, which again emphasizes this idea that
but we were really scared to work with a band and to make it more theatrical, because Eric is so much about rule and strict, strong mechanics, and even on this game, what I always you can see from the previews, I did not want it to work with a grid, a square grid, which is even pushed further in interference in the entrance. And my challenge was, it cannot be a 4x4 grid. It has to be something of a different form or a more complex layout.
But it worked with the band, and you were scared about
we were worried about
the wildness of the play. And
making it too theatrical and not dry enough, and just being... But the great part of the band was that, first, they were fantastic musicians. They all were themselves specifically working with improvisation and highly wonderful in the work that they were doing. But each ruler... the band asked us to give them more feedback. They wanted the ruler to speak more. So Eric suggested that the ruler would say, I'm the ruler of blank, and say whatever they wanted. And the band used that to change the music at each time. So the thing that happened was that person would say, I'm the ruler of the rules, a guy that studied philosophy, and the music was really... But then there's been a super sexy girl, not wearing bra and open, that said, I'm the queen of love. And then the music was that way, and then all the players started moving and dancing in a very sensual way. But what was really great was then, even more than in the previous game, they were not playing the rule, they were the one dominating the game and owning what was happening in that moment. Because they were, for a moment, being really the king of what's happening, of the tone. And everybody was submitting to the mood that they had set, and they were willing to play in their... in the tone that it was being decided.
Right, and so I think we're already here talking about the experience of the game as opposed to the designed elements. The taste of the cake, right? The experience that actually happens.
So compared to architecture, I think it feels that games are so much more condensed than architecture in the feedback that's given. If the game doesn't work, it's immediately clear. It's painfully clear. Of a building, there are so many buildings that are being used even if they don't work and they have fault, and just you use them and they do what they need to do somehow. And that can never happen with game, or it's pitiless. It's both good because when it works, you have an immediate reward and you did your job, and that's okay. And at the same time, well, it's hard when it doesn't work, but it's also very, very honest.
But what about density? Because architecture gets used over a very long period of time. Sometimes people's lifetimes or a generation, right? As opposed to games that are a shorter density.
Yeah, so the experience is also when you're experiencing the game, as Eric said, okay, you forgot the rule, you forgot exactly, and you're just playing, right? Am I saying something? This is maybe the game that's more of any of the game that we did the most intense in experience, just because it's a very physical game. It was at Come Out and Play in New York. It's called Cross My Heart. It's basically a labyrinth made of very 6-meter tall fabric wall, and you're chasing each other in a rock, paper, scissors style. The reference is Ariadne, Theseus, and the Minotaur. So the Minotaur is trying to chase Theseus. Theseus is trying to help me out. Theseus trying to chase the Minotaur.
Theseus is trying to slay the Minotaur, but in the myth, Ariadne is in love with Theseus, and actually her love goes unrequited, even in both endings of that particular myth that exist. And then at the same time, Ariadne is the half-sibling of the Minotaur who's betrayed him. So he made the Minotaur trying to get revenge on his sister. So you're always both the hunter and the hunted in that particular game. And in addition, each of the 3 characters has 2 other allies who have these sticks that can create walls. So our labyrinth didn't have dead ends. It was more like a sort of open-ended walls, but every place where there might be a space between walls, a player with a stick could stand there and create a wall. And you can see that sort of happening in some of the photos. I think what's interesting to me is that this in some ways this was our most architectural work, in the sense that it was a large piece that was really spatially immersive. But the game condenses the whole experience into 15 minutes, right? So it's really something that's measured in moments, not measured in years for a house. And
people who completely forgot about the walls at the same time. When they were playing, it was just very, very wild. I've been bleeding. I'm the one injured. Of course, the walls were there. Of course, it was very good to look at from outside. But who was playing? I think if they were not part of what they were thinking at any moment in the moment in which they were playing. In a good way, I guess.
Yeah. For me, the piece helped me think about this idea of density of experience. And we don't normally think about games that way in terms of the density of experience, whether it's on the computer or off a computer. That's something that I learned as a sort of measure of experience design from architecture. We should, just to go on about that, I think that, I mean, maybe this is the obvious point, but because we often talk about video games, we often think about a game as a virtual experience. But it's not really true that even if you're sitting and playing a console game, it's still an embodied loop that involves your perception and cognition, the kinesthetics of whatever part of your body you're using in order to play the game. And so anytime that we play a game, even a video game, it's a loop that involves our bodies and our minds and other players and the system of the game as well. And one of the things that I've liked exploring with Nathalie is that our games really do explore this idea of embodiment going much further, that our games in some way really, really are physical. And I guess we talked about Starry Heavens already, that the idea that in this case, the physical space of the game becomes a psychological space and becomes a social space. And so this idea of embodying a game in physical space is something that has been fun to explore with you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think we're getting near the end, so maybe we should move forward a little bit. So we're finishing up our ideas of architecture and game design, what we've learned from each other.
The poison of the cake.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
So Nathalie talked about this already, about the idea that playtesting is cruel. This is, I think, something that she's learned about the process of design from games. What is playtesting? Well, at the very early stages of a game, those of you that are game designers know this already, but you know, the idea is that it's impossible to design a game in advance. You can't just make a blueprint for a game or write a design document or a set of rules and then say, okay, well, the game is done and let's see if people have fun with it. Because you're creating a complex dynamic system, people will do things that you don't anticipate. The system will break down, the $3 versus the $4 in 16 tons. There's no way to anticipate that kind of thing. So you have to play test a game in advance. And I guess this is different for you than the way architecture works.
I'm always of course, except from the inner review, when you present something, it's just to show the best and to sometimes fake it a little bit better, keep the problem to be solved. You mean an
architectural presentation?
Keep the problem that yet need to be solved aside. And I am very, very, very uncomfortable every time we play test. I don't want to be there.
Right.
I try to stay aside. I try just to let Eric go ahead, and I feel uncomfortable for the people that are there at that time. I feel uncomfortable for myself. It's a really good experience at the same time because, of course, as an architect, it just made it easier also for me as an architect to take failure and things that don't work in a much faster way and accept it and just go to the next thing. If that doesn't work, that's it. It's been clear enough, but with learning your process of playtesting, how you don't try to suggest or try to convince because you're otherwise spoiling the real result of what you're trying to get. It's a very, very, very honest process.
And so we wanted to show you a little bit of interference. So that's the piece that's downstairs. I assume that most of you have seen it if you haven't tried it out a little bit. And so we do have to start with an idea, obviously, but then what the project of making interference really is about playtesting and prototyping. We have plans, and what were you going to say?
We started in the park in wintertime, and the idea was that, yes, we would have walls, and we just laid sticks of bamboo in the park, and the two of us were there, and so like, what do we do? And Eric had in mind some bocce game-like style, and so I think I started crying when I realized how much I didn't like it. We were talking about having wall, and all what we were doing was to look down on the floor, even though they could have been very narrow and thin and a very interesting extreme space. You were just looking down, not really acknowledging the other person you were maybe playing with, and also, because of the previous game, I think for this the challenge was, what if the work that I do is absolutely necessary to the game? It's not just a decoration. Can we try the two of them to make them as essential to the game in a strong way?
And so we had this idea of creating walls, and of course the challenge for interference was, how do we really prototype that system? How do we set up something that allows us to begin to explore gameplay? There was actually even versions before this that was just, we bought some pegboard, which is just a grid of holes when we were doing things with colored wire and sticking them in the pegboard. This is when we had gotten a little bit closer to the final game, but you can see. Okay, that was more me ruining the microphone than sorry, Science Gallery. So there, you can see there on the left, the image is of sort of a hand-drawn board, and we also were doing some physical printouts just to test the scale of a wall. And a lot of our playtests look like the image on the right, which is basically one of those walls, but rather than being vertical, it's laid down on a table. But because we knew that the pieces had these two sides, these cylindrical pieces, we still had to have pieces that had, sides that could remain hidden. So it was this whole translation in space. But that kind of playtesting allowed us to work on the rules of the game and the game interaction and the layout of the space, even while we were also starting to work on the fabrication of the walls.
Fabrication was really, really tight. We only had really 4.5 months, and the production had to start maybe even when the rules weren't quite finished yet.
Right. Yeah, the production had to start way before the rules were finished. So we were still working on, so we were sort of locked into the physical game. And also just to tell you a little bit, the process is like the central image here is, we also had we did physical prototyping too. So this is actually a section of one of the wall patterns, and all of those holes are slightly different sizes and by like a millimeter.
Just to test the ergonomics, whether by shaking they would start falling all at once because you had shaken one too much.
So we worked a lot with the exact size and weight and of all of those little wooden cylinders, how wide is the groove, how deep is the groove relative to the size of the hole. So we had to do a lot of this kind of industrial design style prototyping as well. And it, it ended up, I think it ended up as a good project. At least it looks great. We've had a lot of fun with this. This is
and one thing
is
that we knew it would be a game for a lobby space, not a lobby space actually, but between a very baroque, rococo, gorgeous
and you should say
entrance,
in the original installation.
In the original installation.
Right, the institution that commissioned
where it was commissioned for.
Yeah.
So it's a contemporary space in Paris, which is for every cultural form that is connected to numerical
design, technology, art,
and,
yes. Pop
culture. And the part of the building is still this very baroque, gold and pink, plenty of curvy line space, while the rest is very minimal. And we knew that they had a large concert hall right next to it with hundreds of person, maybe 800 person. And the design was then for a game that could hold up large number of people at the same time. And as for Starry Heaven, a game that wouldn't need round, that people could join at any time.
Pairs of
people joining at any time.
And so this is if you haven't played, this gives you a sense of the gameplay. This is sort of raw, unedited video from the opening in Paris at La Gaieté Lyrique, which we want to thank for commissioning the piece. So pairs of people are playing this game. It's a little strategic game where you're one color and the other person is another color. But the trick is that you steal pieces from other people's games. So you see that guy in the back just stole a piece from someone's game and is putting it into his wall. He just took a piece from her game. She's laughing about it. Now she's coming to take revenge on him. So every turn, you take a piece from someone else's game and you put it in your game. So she's laughing about that. This is one long shot that just shows you this is when there are several games going on at once, and it becomes almost like a beehive of activity of people sort of playing their own games, going to a different game, taking a piece and moving back. One of the things that Nathalie and I like to do is sort of break the rules of games, in a sense that in 16 Tons, for example, you think, oh, it's my turn, I get to do something. Well, you don't. You have to...
I won, but you're cashless.
Right.
In this case, the first thing you're playing the game against your opponent, but if you just do that, it's horribly frustrating because your pieces just continuously go out and you have no real control of what's happening. If you start negotiating with somebody else, that's when you start having control and you might be able to win or not. So what you start thinking is, this is my game. Well, no, you actually need to play with other people. And maybe that's what it's what stays our poison, or the idea that I hope it's not narratively told, but just comes out through the gameplay. So if you read the rule, you shouldn't be able to, if you just read the rule, you shouldn't be able to understand that there is a design experience that's trying to leverage this sort of, I don't want to say message, but of a situation in which you need to rethink what you were originally considering.
If the classical idea of a game is that, we're playing chess, and during that time, this chessboard as a special place. I'm not going to cheat and move a piece. Certainly no one from the outside world is going to come in and take a chess piece. But that's exactly that sort of classical idea of a game that interference violates. And that you don't necessarily get that just from reading the rules. And that as a result, you end up metagaming across these games. You don't normally think that you have to do that in order to just play a game against a single partner. For me, the kind of context idea that I've learned from architecture is maybe thinking about design in a different time scale. Being a video game designer...
That's an exclamation mark.
What? Am I talking too loudly?
No, 100 years.
Well, I mean, when you make a building, you think about it in terms of decades or centuries, right? Yes?
Go ahead.
Okay, I don't know where she's going with this. Being a video game designer, we are working in one of the cultural fields that is really changing constantly. There are new platforms coming out, new revenue models and distribution models, new forms of interactivity and aesthetics, and it's all sort of chasing Moore's law as computer chips get more and more processing power. As games used to be based on graphics processing, now there's a lot on network connectivity is driving games. So a lot of games that I did 10 years ago, you can't play anymore because the platforms don't exist. The web browsers, are too different.
Eric is admitting he's getting old.
And but I do think that it's different than architects build structures that are meant to last for years or for decades or even for a century or more. And I think that there's a lesson here for game designers that to think about a game as something that's inhabited not just for the duration of an individual game, but for a lifetime. Now, this isn't necessarily something that we've figured out in the work that we're doing together, but it's something that I'd like to think about. I think there are games that are as monumental as buildings and bridges and cities, and those are games like football, by which I mean soccer, not American football, or American football, or chess, poker, basketball, games that people spend their careers and their lives learning at, getting better, being fans of, being scholars of. Games that people really can dedicate their lives to. And I think that in a lot of ways, video game developers maybe are thinking too small. That maybe one thing we can learn from architecture is an idea of design in a sense of scale, both physical scale, but also in terms of time, that we can learn from to think about how it is that games can intersect with people's lives in new ways. These images are from the Brooklyn Game Ensembles Work. It's a group that Nathalie and I are in. It's a game that's based on, just to give you a taste of a new project we're working on, that's based on the Luis Borges story about the infinite library called the Library of Babel.
I think we reached our limit of storage room, so... What
did you say?
We reached the limit of
our storage space in New York City, right, so we have to work on some digital games, not just physical ones. I guess the question is, we often design media as objects to be consumed that fit into a user's life. But what if the player had to fit inside the game instead? More like architecture. What would that mean for games? Any concluding thoughts?
I work with Eric because Eric is workaholic, and we're a couple, so that's the reason.
That's your concluding thought?
No,
Thanks.
there's not. But I came to game with all of the possible, cliche that somebody that didn't play video game could have. And it was just amazing to quickly, it doesn't take much to realize how interesting, and the shows upstairs shows it, how interesting it really is. And I guess I like that it's more and more clear also to other designers that this is happening, and it wouldn't take them much either. I'm trying to advocate, but it wouldn't take them much either to understand that there's a very interesting things happening, which is there's authorship to games as much as to architecture and all the other form of design. And yeah.
And I would say, maybe my concluding thing is I would say that I think that, and maybe this is my own myopia as a game designer, saying that my field is culturally relevant at this time. But I would argue that we're living in an age in which games are going to become a dominant form of the way people spend their leisure time, the way that art and entertainment and media experience are structured. If the 20th century was one in which the moving image came to dominate in terms of personal narratives, the way people told stories, the way that people got their news and information, the way that epic cultural myths were spun out, I think that in this century, games and play are going to become that sort of general template. Now, of course, there was music and theater and literature and wonderful things in the 20th century too, but there's a sense in which the moving image came to dominate things. And that's a form about information. But I think information in our century has sort of been put at play. And that ideas about systems and modularity, customizability, interaction both between a person and a system and between people as a form of art, entertainment, or media experience is going to dominate. And games are not the only modular and customizable and interactive experiences, but they are an ancient, maybe the ancient human form of designed interactive systems as culture. And I think that we're moving into maybe what I would call a ludic century, a century that increasingly is going to have something like games and play at its center. So I think that some of the questions that Nathalie and I are asking across our disciplines maybe have relevance beyond just making interesting works that make people's lives meaningful. I think that games have an important focus to the times that we're living in. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you, Eric and Nathalie. We have time for just a question or two. If anyone, we have another mic up there, so maybe Mads, if you want to ask a question, then I'll give you a mic up there.
Thanks very much. Very interesting. I was wondering, the physical games that you've designed are very much sort of constructed spaces that you're creating for the game experience. Have you thought about working, or have you worked with games that use an existing space? Also, sort of an existing architectural space, like an urban space, or maybe you've already done this?
Some of the projects that we've shown were originally designed for a particular space. I think Nathalie talked about the...
No, but he's saying about using the existing chairs and stairs or seat, right?
Well, any existing environment, really. I mean, so if you look at interference, you constructed, the plates there, and you set it up in that way. And with the balloons, also, is very much about creating a space out of the balloons.
Right.
And I'm thinking, if you have an urban space, how much have you used the existing space? I guess is really the question.
I think we talk about once. It was an idea that never happened, having a game which is about just dots that you place into existing buildings in a city. We didn't do that. I like that. I don't like the idea of making building that it's a game. That I like better if people are... No, if people are using the building in that way, spontaneously.
It's funny. It's an interesting question.
There's also, I mean, this is Nathalie question mark. Even interference, there's so many code embedded, safety code embedded in that room, in that game. The size and length of the game pieces was so that a child couldn't choke. It's 2 centimeter .54 by law in European community, which I mean is unmeasurable. But the size of the hole so that a child couldn't stick its finger, etc., etc. So of course you can work as a hacker and be wild and use the spaces, but at the same time when you work, even the idea of the dots was then, okay, what if somebody then damaged a building, the facade? How can we not make it damaged? Or, but there's who has been working in that way, like hide and seek has been done 99 game for. But I guess I like building things.
Right.
I'm more of an architect than an urban planner in my mind. And
there's a lot of people making street games as interventions. And in fact, I am a professor. I teach game design at New York University at the Game Center. And one of the assignments in our basic game design class is about creating a game intervention in some existing social context. So people have done things like games where you're racing across several blocks, but you have to follow people, for example. So things that are games that are not about building something physical. But I think to own what we've done, I also like the sort of classical idea of the chessboard, right? Even though maybe we're breaking rules of games, it's also nice to create this artificial space. I study martial arts, and when I was studying in Okinawan form, this idea of the dojo as this kind of sacred space of training. To me, there's something similar in games that I love games that intersect with ordinary life, but I also think that I like the idea of the artificial quality of games, which is sort of a fiction, but it's a fiction that's really useful, right? So yes, when you enter a training hall, you don't really leave the real world behind, but it's a context to sort of focus on a certain kind of meaningful experience. So I think our games have been more in that realm. We've talked about games that would be more like a hacker intervention into urban space. But we haven't done it.
And by the way, in New York City, some student of a colleague of Eric got to jail for using chalk on the sidewalk.
Right.
Yes. She had to go to bail them out. Yeah, that's not a joke.
Hi. So I'm just curious, when you're doing the nuts and bolts of your game design work, where you are physically in space, are you sitting forward in front of a computer working away? Are you sitting back on your couch with a notebook? Are you in a park or a cafe? Or does that depend on the type of thing that you're designing and working on?
For the rules of the game, you mean?
Yes.
I think that as the trick...
The subway.
The subway? For me, well, I think about the games that I'm working on all the time. In fact, it's just one way that I go to sleep as I try and think about the games I'm working on. But the trick to me is this playtesting idea that we brought up. That the goal is to spend as little time as possible thinking about rules in the abstract, and as much time as possible being in the moment of working with players, observing them, seeing games in progress. And it's hard. Interference was, I mean, at a certain point, we needed, 4, 6, 8, 10 people to play that game because we were trying to test it as it would be experienced. That means we didn't have a budget for playtesters. We had to get people's schedules. We had to arrange the time, reserve a space, set up the game. So it was hard to do that more than once every few days for an hour or two. So then in between, of course, it's all of those things. There's a shift that happens with games, especially in these physical games. When you get the system mostly established, the emphasis of playtesting becomes also about people learning the rules. So there's a huge amount of iteration that we did, not just on what the rules are, but how the rules are presented on the page. Now we knew that at the original place in Gaieté d'Arhic and here at the Science Gallery, they have these great mediators that are there to help explain the game. And Interference is a game designed to require explanation. In other words, we bumped up the complexity a little bit because we knew that we could lean on having people in the gallery to help explain the game. But we still wanted to make sure that in the worst case scenario, the mediator is helping someone else, or in the bathroom, a bunch of people come in, can they learn the game from the rules? So we spent a lot of time on the wording and the layout, the flow through the rules, and that's a sense in which game designers, game designers are mathematicians and logicians and psychologists, but they're also educators. Every game designer is an educator because it's part of your task to educate people how to play your game. And that's part of the game design problem. So that's also, I'm kind of answering it in a long-winded way, but so we would sit and tweak and redesign, but ultimately the cruelty of the playtest that Nathalie talked about, that's the moment when the truth of your design comes out, when all your great ideas come crashing down, right? Because you really have to respect the playtesting context and what comes out of that. So I try and not be someone who's sort of holed up alone in a world of systems, but instead, that's just the preparation for the really important part, which is the play of the game. It's a really interesting question, though. Is it similar with architecture? I mean, how do you... What I don't understand is you guys spend a huge amount of time...
It's the opposite.
You guys build models. Do you think building a model as a plan or a physical model? When you guys build, the classic architecture thing is a cardboard model or something like that. Is that for the architect or is it for the client? Does the architect?
No, it's for the architect, of course.
It's for the architect.
But
is that like a prototype?
What you describe, you reach a much more immediate test with the playtesting that you can never in architecture.
Right.
And there's fun. I used to work in a very wealthy area where Calvin Klein, it's a story, it was on the news, tear down a huge mansion to build instead a very modest, huge contemporary house and build that model 1-to-1 in plywood. Model 1-to-1 means the real scale, just made of cheap
So he
plywood.
built a plywood version of the house so he could see. Did he end up building?
He didn't like it, and that was cancelled, but yeah.
So, so model building is like prototyping. But architects, you guys really have to commit in a way that game designers don't. In video games, we see it in patching now, right? Almost every game that comes out, there's patches and downloads, updates to the game, and that's game designers continuing to iterate on the rules, the balance of the game, fixing technical bugs, expanding the game's content. We did playtesting for the game, for Premiere, Interference's premiere in Paris, basically up to the day before the opening. We were still, at that point, we were making sure that when you played it in the French translation, or was the French translation, like, was everyone getting all the concepts? And we can't do that with the walls. We had to commit to the physical design of the walls months before installation.
And then, of course, as soon as we saw the wall, we realized how the transparency was going from one wall to the other. And some person entered and said, oh, is it a game about getting alignment through the 5 walls? Which it's intuitive, but no, we never thought about it. We had pieces of paper. What a good idea. Damn it, I didn't even thought it.
I think we have time for one more question. If anybody has one, there we go. Just before we...
how you doing?
Good.
Sorry, a bit loud. Just from all the games that you showed, I really liked Starry Heaven. Obviously, what I kind of really noticed, which was the board itself that you got the players to stay on. Like, I know myself, the play testing is absolutely cruel. Like, how many designs, how many iterations, how many play tests you have to go through to get the board right for that type of game? Because, like, obviously, how long the game goes on for is a key, crucial thing.
This started with a game board that was made only with number.
On a table. We did tabletop.
No, but Starry Heaven, you said.
Yeah, Starry Heaven. Yeah, you didn't even play the tabletop version.
But they were 1, 2, 3, 4. It was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
We used numbers. Yeah.
We were thinking there is a record that's randomly reading number. It was a hexagon based first. The way we continuously changed the type of line that was connecting from one another, how many connections each one had, was like a snowflake, right? It could go in infinite possible variation.
Yeah. So the one of the things that it's funny the way you end up at a place. The 16 Tons only got the name 16 Tons, which, by the way, is from a folk song from the 50s, an American folk song about working in a mining town and being in debt to the company that hired you. It's sort of like the post-slavery form of indentured servitude. That anyway.
Sing, right?
What's that? No, I won't sing the song 16 Tons. But that content, which is sort of fits the game perfectly, at the very end, we sort of made that decision. Similarly, in Starry Heavens, we started with this problem of, we knew that we had to make a game for this event, a party. We wanted a game that you could enter and leave at any time, that was for a big number of people. And so there's this problem in games of turn taking, which is that if you have to wait for someone else to move to take your turn, then the game can get boring with a lot of people. I'm waiting for you, or it gets confusing. Whose team, who went last, who goes next, do I go next? And we didn't want that. If it's a real-time game like
Cross My Heart
Up to Die, it gets wild, and that wasn't quite, it was just MoMA, and we didn't want it to get that risky, and it gets more sports-like, which is great, and I like designing physical games, but so we came up with this idea that players would move all at the same time.
And that was one every 3 to move.
Right. So at first we actually had a recording that was saying random numbers, and if you were on the number, that it was called out, then you could move. And you know, some of the things from that very first playtest, from that very first version, were in the final game, like the idea of surrounding someone to kick them out of the game, and then it was just about survival. But it went through many, many iterations of the board and the rules. And I would say that even when we showed it in Berlin, we decided to hold a playtest and see if we could make the game better. And we did. We actually added a lot of rules because we had the band there that made it more theatrical. We added the I am the ruler of blank. We made moments so that we had the players do things at certain moments of the game, like say revolution when you overthrew the ruler.
The game was in the big alley where in Eastern Germany there used to be the parade. So I'm really uncomfortable when the game is giving you a rule that you don't feel it's too forceful. For example, at MoMA, I think people wouldn't have want to say revolution and lift their arm. It was just like imposing, be theatrical, but you don't really want to do it.
But it worked in
but
this
there
context.
It worked so much because of
It's
the music
it's a
was
street game festival,
making everybody more
different group of players.
Yes,
yeah.
and so it really became
right.
People were much louder than they were in New York.
I think there's an interesting danger in iteration. I mean, it's possible to sort of over-polish a game, over-test it. You can sometimes play-test all the quirkiness or interesting things out of a game. If every time there's frustration, you sort of sand down a corner and make all the edges rounded. And so, you know, you have to be careful about playtesting too much. Also, you can maybe at a certain point you want to let a game be, right? That there's a sort of indulgence in wanting to play test and make something better too. So I think it just varies based on an individual games. But what were you going to say, Nathalie?
And then just at the end, the grid at the end is still very mathematical, and that doesn't matter at all for the game. But just by changing the size of the plate, they are still plate in which you're stepping.
Right.
It doesn't look as strict, which again doesn't change at all the game, but it reminds maybe more of a constellation, I hope.
Right. So we iterated a lot on the rules, on the grid size, so that it's big enough to be theatrical, but you still need to be able to touch someone. And
we had the limit of the space in front of the, as you can see, it's pretty tight. The game is almost reaching the.
But that's the fun of being a game designer, I think, is that sometimes it feels less like writing a book, which has some of this, but more like raising a pet. Like it really, yes, as you're writing something, and it evolves in unexpected ways and things work that you thought wouldn't work. But with a game, it literally does things you never thought would happen. Players think up things to do, it breaks down or it shines in ways that you didn't anticipate. And so that's the pleasure of iteration. And I think that one of the things I think one of the pleasures of being a game designer is that while of course I'm an author in a sense, I also, as much as possible, want to expand my sense of authorship to include my players, to take their ideas in during playtests, to collaborate with them, to see what they do, and to open myself up to the unexpected possibility of what happens during iteration. And that's one of the great pleasures of working in this kind of form, this interactive systems form that is a game.
Well, we've broken the rules a little bit and gone a little over time, but I would just say we're going to step out and have a look at interference. If any of you want to join us and have a massive game of interference, but let's have a big round of applause for our two speakers tonight.